Good morning and welcome to the Caregiver Teleconnection. My name is Glenda Rogers and I'm going to be your facilitator for today's session. Today we're going to be talking about modern caregiving for modern millennials with Dr. Elliot Montgomery Sklar and Samara Yesovitch. So we're so glad they are with us this morning. Before they get started on the presentation, let me introduce you to Dr. Sklar if you are not familiar with him. He is a public health professional with 2 decades of experience in supporting the health of the public through academic work, research, and service. He has led healthy aging programs for seniors and for caregivers in Canada, Florida, and virtually, and his research is focused on the complexity of issues related to aging and caregiving. Dr. Sklar is an associate professor of healthcare sciences at Nova Southeastern University in Florida. He publishes and presents his work internationally. Welcome, Elliot.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. I am honored to be joined today by Samara Yesovitch. Samara began her clinical career running group workshops for elementary and high school students following a Master of Science degree in behavioral psychology from Florida International University. For almost a decade, Samara worked as a governmental social services organization supporting youth and families before she acquired her Master of Applied Science in Couple and Family Therapy at McGill University. Later, Samara became the local wellness advisor for the Deshotel Faculty of Management at McGill University, where she works with students, staff, and faculty to enhance student wellness at the business school. In addition, she currently works in private practice in Montreal, Canada, and serves as a consultant to public and private organizations across North America. Welcome, Samara, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Wow. Elliot, will you just kind of walk with me wherever I go and just introduce me every time? You make me sound amazing. Thank you.
Would be my pleasure. So we're thrilled to be talking about something really important today. The issue of caregiving for millennials, which is something that's unfortunately not really talked much about. And I think it's very important for the context of our conversation that we first define who millennials are. Now, ahead of the hour, we were talking about that because generational cutoff points are not an easy or exact science. I think that they should really be viewed primarily as tools, allowing for the kinds of analyses detailed right here on our slide. But their boundaries are certainly not arbitrary. Now, generations are often considered by their span, but again, there's no agreed upon formula as to how long that span should be. At 16 years, so from 1980 to 1996, our definition of millennials is about equal in age span to their preceding generation, Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980. So by this definition, both are shorter than the span of baby boomers, and that generation lasted 19 years, the only generation officially designated by the US Census Bureau, interestingly. And it's based upon the famous surge in post-World War II births in 1946 and a significant decline in birth rates after 1964. Millennials are the most racially and ethnically diverse adult generation in the nation's history, yet the next younger generation, Generation Z, is even more diverse. So today, the millennials that we're going to be talking about are between the ages of about 27 to 42. They are young adults, usually starting families and careers, and experiencing some unique challenges as caregivers. And we're going to talk certainly about that today. They also have some very unique perspectives on the role of caregiving. So Samara, I know this is an area of your expertise.
Well, it's funny that we're talking about all the different ways that we define, who is a millennial based on this year and that year. We also have all these labels, right? Who are millennials? What are millennials? Are we the entitled generation? I know that is something that we have been accused of. By the way, full disclosure, I'm not going to say how old Elliot is, but I'm 42. So I'm actually, Elliot's also 42. So we are, born in 19, we are are they, aren't they millennials? I'm a millennial and I wear that label very, very proudly, but labels stick. So let's talk about that. So some of us we're known to be entitled. Others say that we're civic minded. People say that we're adaptive, and there's also somewhere someone says that we're conventional. None of these words seem to go together. They all seem to be quite conflictual. So it's like no one can seem to agree, and I think that's very fitting because, as Elliot said, we're one of the most diverse generations out there. So that actually makes sense. I think it's important to know, what happened, right? What happened? What was like a very significant event that happened for our generation? And I think that's 9/11. Most of us were between the ages of 5 and 20 when that event occurred. And I think it's really important. I mean, it definitely talks about, how fleeting life can be, but I think it also, for me, I think of the word disillusioned, the idea that, anything can happen, and, like the structures that are designed to keep us safe, let's say, whatever, like things are just more fragile and fleeting than we think. And I think that has had I really think it's had a significant effect on the way we see things. Also, we came of age and entered the workforce in the height of an economic recession. And I think that also has a really big impact on the way we see ourselves and our roles and how we relate to each other in the world. It's well documented that millennials' life choices and future earnings and our entrance into adulthood has very much been shaped by this recession. And it may not have been the case for the older and younger counterpoints. The long-term effects for us is, things like a slow start to our launching, our independence, our financial success, and things like home ownership. Like, we can talk about inflation, but that's not enough to explain why housing prices have gone so crazy. It's the home ownership for millennials it's a very big factor in American society, and it's going to be for decades. And it definitely has a big effect on caregiving, which is what we're discussing today.
It's interesting that you talk about that, because I think a lot of millennials, whereas our previous generation, for example, like when my grandparents got sick, the notion was to have a spare bedroom in our home and my mom would look after my grandmother. But nowadays, that isn't the case because of the financial realities of our generation. And many millennials are moving in with their parents, not the other way around. So, it's quite interesting. And that certainly has an impact on how people are feeling as caregivers in this generation. The US is actually home to 40 million caregivers. And about 1 in 4 are millennials. But the national data that we have is quite limited. Now, the last AARP Caregiving in America report was published back in 2020, and the data was collected certainly preceding the time that it was published, so somewhere around 2018, 2019. Their report is only published once every 5 years, so they should be in data collection mode probably in the next coming year. And I think the pandemic experience really, really changed the experience of caregiving and of our data also. So the data that we have today might not be 100% reflective of the realities of living in 2022. But that 2020 report suggested that millennial caregivers were more often single, never married, and had lower household incomes than generations before them, which is, to speak to what you were saying, Samara. They also reported caring for someone with a long-term physical condition, but also caring for people with mental health issues. And I think that this is something new. We didn't really talk about this in generations past. I don't really remember anyone of my parents' generation caring for someone older who had mental health issues, in fact. So I think that was really very interesting, because I think it is something more common with our generation to talk about our mental health. And we're certainly more aware of it. There are more medications on the market. We see more ads on TV about drugs for mental health, certainly than generations before. Half of the millennials in the AARP report were the sole unpaid caregiver, and few reported having paid help as compared to generations before them. Now, again, that's not surprising because if you have a later launch to your career, you might have fewer resources for paid help. Millennial caregivers are typically working full-time while also providing care. And many believe that their role gives them a sense of purpose, which I think also goes back to the generational aspect of growing up during 9/11 and seeing how important those, and fleeting really, those important familial relationships can be. Despite the burden of caregiving, millennials were the most likely group to say actually that caregiving was rewarding. 91% of millennials reported that, and 88% actually in a worldwide study. So I thought this would be a good point to open it up for some discussion to see if we do have any millennial caregivers. Do you feel like that data is reflective of your experience?
So you can put something in the chat box, you can unmute your microphone, and I will call on you by your name.
In the meantime, I'm going to add in my 2 cents.
Please.
So I think that I have a bit of a unique perspective here as a therapist. I have always valued honesty, self-honesty. I feel like you can lie to whoever you want, but you probably shouldn't lie to yourself. And I believe that people believe things that help them get through their day-to-day. And now I don't want to poke holes in the argument that, that caregiving is rewarding. Of course it is. Of course it is. But I wonder if, talking about how rewarding this thing that we do, this unpaid work and often unappreciated work, and helping somebody with mental health issues who sort of is by definition can be like unable to be grateful for what we do. Sometimes I wonder if it's something that we tell ourselves to help self-soothe so we don't get anxious about what we're doing, so we don't get angry about the situation that we're in. And this is not a criticism, it's just I see you.
I get it.
I see you. Yeah. And this is coming, and by the way, I don't want to get too personal on this because it's being recorded, but I've done this. Yeah. I've told myself, you know what, I'll tell you a little bit. I'm a mental health worker. I work for a university, and I work for a very top-rated university with students who are really hard on themselves. And, being a mental health worker during during those intense, give or take 2 years when everybody was home and people were, working from the convenience of their homes, it took a lot out of me. And I remember saying, yeah, but this is such rewarding work. Of course, that was right up until I burned out. I love it, Darlene. I can see you nodding your head, and I'm extremely grateful. Thank you. So yeah, what we do is rewarding. There's no question. But we also need to be seen, and so please keep this slide or keep this in mind when we talk about self-care.
I think you bring up a good point that I think people of any generation can relate to.
Yeah.
Any comments? Anyone want to chime in? We're very informal. Please.
Go ahead, Darlene. Yeah.
I think because of my spiritual background, that helps support me. Everything that she is saying, I have suffered it or not suffered it. I participated in that same exact role. The only reason I'm not at the top of the pay scale is because I don't have Dr. Myers, I said that the other day, behind my name. But I'm able to do the things that Dr. Myers cannot do or reason in their head to do. Yes, yes, there are tons of unpaid caregivers. I've been a caregiver for our mother. I was her caregiver. I was my father's caregiver. And I worked in a caregiver situation and I love it to death. But I don't want to reach burnout. So I resigned and I decided to control the caregiving that I do so that I won't overdo myself. And I'm now helping caregivers, but it's by my choice how I do that. And I'm just blessed that I was able to resign my job financially. We're prior military, so some of the things that I needed, it's already in place. And my lifestyle is minimum.
Well,
Minimal.
I want to thank you personally for your sharing, but also for the work that you do and for setting what sounds like a healthy boundary for yourself.
Also, the first thing that comes to mind is, Darlene, the insight that you have and the position that you've managed to put yourself in about being a leader for other caregivers. You're going to be able to instill that in other caregivers, and I think it's really powerful. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, well, we'll go on. And Darlene, if you have anything else that you want to share as we keep going, I welcome it always from anyone. As you can tell, Samara and I are pretty informal and we like inserting humor into our presentation. So I know lunch is coming up and I thought this was an appropriate slide. It looks like a delicious sandwich, but I was surprised to learn this actually, that millennial caregivers are known as the panini generation. I'm sure many of you remember the sandwich generation that certainly my parents were a part of. Many baby boomers considered themselves to be sandwich generation caregivers. And I think, this has happened throughout time. What I found very interesting too is that in a global caregiver well-being index, 25% of Gen Z and millennial caregivers were in caregiving roles for the first time during the pandemic. And the study went on to talk about the fact that younger millennials moved home, as we were talking before, actually, because of COVID from larger cities or living away. And in doing so, a lot of them discovered that their parents weren't in as great shape, or grandparents for that matter, were also struggling. They also have had more difficulty finding affordable services in their recipients' community than baby boomers. And it's something, actually, I was at a doctor appointment this morning with my husband, and they were talking about actually the shortage in healthcare workforce and how hard it is to get referrals for specialist appointments and imaging and things like that. And so the truth is really there, and people are seeing it in practice. There are a lack of affordable care options and a lack of available personnel. And because economics certainly play a factor in all this, some millennial caregivers are being called the panini generation because they're really feeling the pressure. It can certainly be a result of the fancy sandwiches we also seem to like. Some TV shows say that it's because of millennials that sandwiches now cost $20. And it could be, but the truth of the matter is that millennial caregivers are certainly feeling the heat and they're feeling being pressed. They differ from typical middle-aged caregivers from the sandwich generation because they had more financial security and resources. Many of them at the time, paid care services were much more affordable than it is today. So I thought that was a very interesting perspective. And I was curious to ask our participants today, do you think that the panini generation is different from a sandwich generation? Or is it just a matter of language?
Once again, you can unmute your microphone and I will call on you by your name, or you can put something in the chat box or raise your hand. Join us in the conversation.
I don't know if this is accurate from my perspective because I'm not a millennial or a part of the sandwich generation, but I feel like the panini part comes from the added pressure, like you mentioned earlier. I don't think it has to do with wording, even though that they could be partially responsible for the increased price of sandwiches, just something comical there. But when you look at how much more intense stressors have become as the years have progressed, and then added to the natural, aging parents, things that everybody typically goes through in a lifetime, I think it really compounds into further pressed sandwiches to, further the metaphor there.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that perspective and what you shared. And I do agree. I think also there is a difference from previous generations in that the technology that we have never, in some cases, never allows us to shut off. Ahead of our program, I had mentioned that where I'm located, we just went under a hurricane watch. And rather than university and school closures, which was always the case if there was a hurricane, now we're told to stay online and work remotely. So that doesn't allow for the experience of stress, the requirement of time for preparation for things. So the realities are very different. And, we certainly have programs about disaster preparedness if you're a caregiver, which is stressful in and of itself. So imagine having little kids who might also be home from school, having to think about preparing for an older loved one. And as we were talking about earlier, inflation, the cost of things, they're very expensive today. So thank you. I appreciate your comment. Anyone else? All right, we'll move right along.
You know what I'm thinking about?
Oh, you went mute. Can't hear you.
Oh,
Can't hear you.
I heard her. No, I'm sorry, Samara, you're muted somehow.
Or
Come back.
Oh, I hear you now.
Oh, okay.
Okay, there you are.
What were you thinking about?
When you were, I know that it's not my turn to talk yet, but I don't like waiting. I was just, I'm thinking about business as usual, what you were saying, Elliot, about, having this hurricane watch, which is extremely stressful, but still having to just business as usual. Like never seems to get a break. And I'll talk more about this after, but it's really tough.
I think it's true for all people, though, again, of all generations. I just think this wasn't something that maybe existed, 25 years ago that our parents had to go through. I remember when my mom was the caregiver for my grandmother, when she left work hours ended. There was no internet at home or email on her phone or stuff like that. And that definitely adds stress and pressure, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Samara, did you want to talk about the change in family structure?
Yeah, well,
I know we're moving a little quickly. It's just, I'm trying to be mindful of our time and content.
Yeah, well, the whole thing is, boomers had their children a little bit later than the previous generation, and millennials are having children even like later and fewer. And it's important to consider, for the future, all the issues that millennial caregivers are experiencing and how it's going to affect future generations. These are things that we don't really consider when we look about sort of the bigger picture, like how it affects more caregiving issues. For all these reasons, it's really important that that millennial caregivers find balance, for all their lives and responsibilities. And something that comes to mind is, can we move? Can we go to the next slide?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'm cognizant of the time.
This one?
No, I wanted to talk. Isn't it time for me to talk about self-care?
We
can.
I
skip something? Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I really want to leave time for this because we have so many responsibilities. And I think it's important that we really pay attention to ourselves. I know self-care has become a bit of a buzz term along with mindfulness. And because of that, there's a threat to its losing its meaning and its significance, but it's really, really important. And a lot of people don't even understand what it means. I remember when we first started talking about self-care, it was, for me, it was like in 2014 or something. And I started talking about it with my clients and they were like, what, give like another thing on my to-do list, you know? You know, it's important to note that we have to make space for ourselves and we have to make room for ourselves. So what I've done here is I've split up the self-care notions into two parts. One, the four on top are more practical, and the ones on the bottom are a little bit more, what's the word? A little more abstract, let's say. So let's start with the practical one. So meet and communicate. So you know they say like WYK when you know, you know. I think it's really important for people to talk to peers and you know, to talk about, you know, they say shop talk or war stories, like, oh, this thing happened to me, like, can you identify with that? Like, oh yeah, like talking to people who sort of get it, who are in the know of what it's like to be a caregiver. It can really, it promotes overall well-being and actually prevents burnout. So you know, friends and family connections, they actually do foster resilience. We think about resilience as something that lives inside of us, but the truth is we don't always feel strong. So it's important to rally, you know, to borrow the resilience of the people around us, to, you know, we make those connections and it really does foster a happier life and prevent burnout. You know, meeting with friends, whether it's online or IRL, you can help find solutions to challenges. It kills boredom. And you don't need to have a ton of connections, right? We talk about like how many followers, how many friends on social media do you have? But really, this is really a case of quality over quantity. A few genuine people can really make a difference in your life. So please don't isolate yourself. It is important to talk and give yourself permission to talk about yourself. The next one is pretty obvious, stretch it out. This is a small thing that can actually make a really big difference. We don't always have time to do a yoga class or go to a Pilates class, but we can always spare a few minutes to do some meaningful stretches. You know, you can schedule it in, you can do it, you know, when you wake up, you can do it when you at bedtime or just when you remember, go with your own style. You know, YouTube, you can find any kind of stretch for every part of the body anywhere on the internet. It's probably one of the easiest things to find, and just do what feels good. You know, don't worry about if you're doing the right one. You know, don't think about the opportunity cost. Like if I do this stretch and I'm not doing the stretch, just stretch. It's always a good use of your time. Aromatherapy. This is a pretty inexpensive and very time. You know, you can do it while you're doing other things. That's why I like aromatherapy so much. A few scents that I really like. Lemon is very invigorating and it can make you feel energized. It's also really good for relieving nausea. It actually helped me a lot when I was in my first trimester when I was pregnant. Lavender is a very fresh and clean scent. It's been known to relieve anxiety. It has a very calming smell. Eucalyptus is also very fresh and clean, and it can be soothing. Bye, Darlene. Thank you so much. It can be very soothing and also can be very effective when you feel sick. Not necessarily nausea, but like if you have a cold or something, it can be really good for the sinuses. Chamomile can soothe irritability and tension. And cinnamon is very spicy, so it can stimulate. It can wake up a tired brain and improve concentration. It's kind of an exciting smell. And then one of my favorites is vanilla. Of course, it depends on your mood, but you know, it has a very comforting and warm, you know, like the smell of cookies, right? Vanilla is a very warm and comforting smell. So aromatherapy is something that is a pretty simple solution. Pet therapy. So not everybody has a pet, but usually people know somebody with a pet, and you know, you can offer to help somebody and enjoy their pet at the same time by offering to, you know, take care, you know, watch somebody's cat or take care of their dog, or, feed their fish or whatever it is. And you could also, visit an animal shelter. That's something that is, good it's for the greater good, but can also be good for yourself. Let's go to the bottom part. Ask for what you want. So earlier we talked about, yes, caregiving is very meaningful and it gives us purpose, but it's important to get the credit. Like, demand that social credit for doing what you're doing. They say, like, if a tree falls in the forest, does anybody hear the tree fall? Like, if nobody notices the good work that you're doing, it's great that you notice it, but it's okay to ask. It's okay to ask for some recognition, and it's not selfish. It's really great. There's a self-care tip about making somebody else happy, but you're already doing that, so I'm not going to tell you to do that. Making a difference in somebody else's life can potentially be joy-giving. It can foster feelings of accomplishment, but it's not automatic. So if you don't get or give yourself the credit, you're going to run out of fuel. So keep that in mind. Gratitude. So I wonder if anybody here has a story. If anybody here has a story, please tell it. But I feel pretty confident that everybody here has a memory of somebody in authority looking at them when they were little and saying, "What's the matter, you? Why aren't you smiling? What's wrong? Why are you in such a bad mood? Don't you know how lucky you are? Why don't you be grateful for the things that you have?" That's not what I mean when I talk about the practice of gratitude. It's actually the opposite of that. I remember when I first heard about the idea of gratitude, I kind of rolled my eyes a little bit, because I remembered that authority figure saying, "Samara, you're so lucky. You should just be grateful for what you have." Do you know what that made me feel? What did it make you feel, Samara? It made me feel ashamed. I was still feeling what I was feeling, but I was feeling shame on top of that, and that's a very painful emotion. So what do I mean when I talk about the practice of gratitude? Honey, it's all about selective perception, right? It's all about seeing, accentuating what we want and maybe minimizing the things that are not making us so happy. It's about paying attention to the things that we are actually grateful for, not the things that we should be grateful for. It's also about looking at our values. What are the things that are actually important to us, as opposed to the things that the super ego, the societal, those in authority figures tell us that what we should value. It's about really trying to be honest with ourselves about what is really important to us and what really makes us tick, what really makes us happy. Being grateful for the positive qualities that we have, the things that actually make us happy, because everything else is just noise.
Those are all really good points. And as you were talking about pet therapy, another idea that came to mind is just visiting a dog park, actually, or a park where there might be some nature. I often find that when I'm feeling stressed, I take a bike ride to a park near my home that has a bunch of ducks, and there's some ducklings, and it just gives me a sense of calm. So I wanted to open it up. You had asked if anyone had a story to share. I welcome that. And if anyone else has any comments or tips that have been helpful for them.
Once again, you can unmute your microphone. You can put something in the chat box.
I know personally, I used to think self-care was always something I had to set aside time to do, but I've found ways to work it into a busy schedule, whether that's just appreciating, oh, I'm so glad I brought this trail mix to lunch. I really needed this delicious snack. It seems really silly saying these things out loud, but, being able to sit down in a comfortable chair, I feel like that really gives me relief during the day if I'm feeling stressed. And then, of course, being able to take the time to do things like, for me, meditation really does help. If it's just doing the box breathing, whatever that might be, doing whatever I can tailor my day to.
Yeah. Thanks,
That is
Megan.
That is so true, and thank you for sharing that. I think it's a great idea of sort of incorporating stuff into the course of the day. And like you were saying, Samara, that's the nice thing about aromatherapy, is that it's sort of something that you can do multitasking.
Yeah.
I used to have colleagues in the office who, for the holidays, I would buy them little aromatherapy diffusers and oils, because it was something they could keep in their office, and it would sort of bring the mood down a little bit if needed, if things were stressful.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's funny that you mentioned going to the dog park, because I went to the dog. I didn't do it on purpose. I went to the park. We've been having amazing weather in Montreal. That's where I am. And we have, it's been unseasonably warm, and we spent the day outside in the park, and we passed by the dog park, and it never occurred to me to do something like that, but it was really nice to see those living, breathing animals in nature. And it also makes you realize that we're all sort of part of something bigger, and we're all connected. And I know it sounds a bit hokey and cheesy, but I don't know, there's something about that I find very comforting.
Well, there is a lot of research that supports that being in nature helps to bring our blood pressure down and helps to make us feel more at ease.
Yeah. I want to talk about one last self-care strategy, and this one is very close to my heart. It's one that I have been practicing, and it's funny that we call these things, we call gratitude and affirmations, we call them a practice, because it is literally something that you need to practice in order for it to work. So I'm going to talk about affirmations now. I could do an entire workshop on affirmations alone.
We'll give you up to 5 minutes, and then I can finish up with the rest of the presentation. Okay. How affirming is that?
How affirming is that? So affirmations are quite simply positive statements that we make about ourselves. Some people like to write them down over and over and over in a journal. Some people like to say them in front of a mirror. Some people just like to, say it to themselves throughout the day. I like to, I bike to work, and I use that time to practice my affirmations. Basically what they do is they challenge the negative covert thoughts that compete against our self-confidence. And why do I say covert? It's because the negative self-talk, and don't pretend you don't participate in this. We all have a voice that lives inside of ourselves. And it's basically, this voice is an amalgamation of everything we've seen, heard, experienced, or had modeled for us. And the voice is ourselves, but it's also an internalization of everything else. And it works to protect us, but sometimes protecting us looks like self-flagellation and criticism. And I could talk about why we do that, and how it sort of is evolutionarily adaptive and all that, but I'm not going to go into that right now. But I am going to say that these affirmations can be an important antidote to the toxic or poisonous self-critic that threatens our well-being. We talk ourselves into thinking that we're not good enough, especially on a bad day, right? Especially on a particularly challenging day when we're extra hungry or hangry or tired. Have anyone ever said, like, don't try to make decisions on the days that you're hangry, on the days that you're tired.
So true.
Yeah. So affirmations, they literally do the opposite. And I don't know if any of you are going, no, Samara, no. Okay, I'll do the aromatherapy, but don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining. These are just words, okay? But you know what? The negative self-talk are also just words. That's it. What makes one more powerful than the other is that the negative self-talk is the covert stuff that we do mindlessly all the time without even realizing it. So the affirmations are sort of, what's that old thing about the story about the guy pushing the boulder up the mountain?
Sisyphus.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it feels like the affirmations can be like Sisyphus point, pushing a boulder up a mountain, because it's very much going against the grain. And that's why it takes practice. But they actually do work. And here's a beautiful thing that I'm going to tell you right now, is that you don't necessarily have to believe the affirmations at the beginning. Like, even if you don't believe them, still do them, because you've been doing the negative stuff for so long that the awkward stuff, that the positive stuff could be awkward at the beginning. But keep at it. And I'm going to give you an example of how well it works. Okay. I have been thinking of myself as a resilient person for a long time. I think, Elliot, you can attest to that, right? Because we've known each other for a long time. And a couple of years ago, I was doing a workshop on resilience, and I remember thinking, yeah, I'm a very resilient person. And I remember thinking, okay, what's the evidence that shows that I'm resilient? And I remember thinking, I don't have any. It's just that I've been telling myself for so long that I'm resilient that I just believe it. And I didn't even know that I was doing that affirmation, but there you go.
And Minerva wrote, once you get used to positive self-talk, it eventually makes the negative talk harder to hear. I try to do it in the morning. Yes, it's so true. I try to do it in the morning, but I can do it when I'm driving or sitting at my desk. So true. Great. Amen.
Thank you so much. So true. And I'm so glad that I got, somebody else to agree, because it can be a hard sell sometimes. Oh, and so how important. Oh, sorry.
No, I was affirming how important it is.
Thanks. And so the last question is, what will my affirmation be? There's so many things, there's so many choices. My advice is, there's a few things. Think about your negative self-talk and target it. Like, depending on what your negative self-talk sounds like, what it looks like, whatever, what it smells or tastes like, target that and then say the opposite. And that's your affirmation. And if you really have no idea what to start, again, go to the internet, Google affirmations, you will find more than you know what to do with. That's it. That's all I got for self-care.
All right. Did anyone have any comments or questions, Glenda? Was there anything you wanted to add?
It's kind of like when you were saying that, Samara, I was thinking, okay, but it's knowing when to stop yourself from that negative and adding in that affirmation. Because sometimes we get in that spiral. Mm-hmm. I know you know what I'm talking about. Everybody.
Yeah. Everyone does. And I think that's one of the benefits to having a therapist like Samara with us today, is because some of this stuff is sort of hard to scratch the surface of. And it is so important, especially for our generation, one that is more mindful of mental health, as I was saying earlier. And Samara, I thought the idea of resilience, and sort of, I was cataloging in my head, what are my achievements to back that up? So I think that in and of itself could be a good exercise. I wanted to just touch upon some kind of practical things and important things before we wrap up for today. I am really mindful of the time, and I like how spontaneously we've let conversation flow and just been back and forth. So I am going to go a little bit back for a moment, because we were talking about some generational issues that are important. And I want you all to remember today's program, because you will have heard it here first. Nothing that our generation is talking about is the fact that we have less siblings than our parents perhaps did, and we're having less children than our generation before us. So there are less people to share in the role of caregiving. And that has an implication also when you begin your career during the height of a recession. So it is very challenging for caregivers who might be in their early 40s, as Samara and I are, who might be caring for a small child while also having to care for a parent. that is physically demanding and something the generations before us haven't really experienced because we are typically having our children later in life. So what you're hearing here today first is that we need to be planning now for how it is that we're going to age, who will provide that care to us. More people in our generation are single or divorced. Baby boomers have a higher divorce rate than generations prior, and many are aging alone or are unmarried as they're doing so, which places the burden again of caregiving on us as children, as millennials. So this is nothing that I've heard in research or anywhere talked about, and why we really wanted to do today's program, because we need to be planning. We need to be saving our resources and thinking of how will this all affect us in generations and time to come. So it's a very important issue that I think we'll be talking more about as we start getting older, but one that we need to be planning for and thinking about now. So remember today's program, because you heard it here first, start saving for your aging. Now,
yeah,
please go ahead.
I'm so sorry. I just want to add something.
Yeah.
So one of the things that happens, and I can attest to this because I am, I am a millennial, and I am somebody that also had a child later in life. And it can be a little bit more physically challenging to be a parent. I am maybe somebody in that that's going to be in that panini situation. Luckily I'm not there yet. But not only can it be a little bit more physically challenging, although I'd like to think that I'm in pretty good shape with all the self-care that I've been doing, but it's also a little bit more emotionally challenging. When you have children at a later age, I don't know how to say this without being indelicate, but we're a little bit more neurotic when we're older. When you're younger, you can you're a little bit more carefree when you're younger.
I would say the more appropriate term would be we're more aware.
And hyper aware at that. When you're younger, you're a little bit more carefree. You're a little, you talk about your 20s. Like, my parents are having children in their 20s. In my 20s, I was a fetus. I had no idea what was happening. I was making a lot of choices that were not necessarily the best ones. And now I'm in my 40s and I have a young child, and I just think about all the things that could go wrong, and it's scary. And again, talk about what we talked about earlier, right? Like thinking about 9/11 and the recession. Like these are all things that are just that it's just the constant hum of anxiety that's living inside of our heads and inside of our bodies. And let's just not pretend that it's not there, because suffering is not necessarily a choice, but suffering in silence is. And not talking about these things is not a good choice. So it's important to, like as Elliot said, you heard it here first. And it's time to start planning.
It is time to start planning. The other important issue that I was going to talk about is that our generation really grew up at the time that the internet came about. And this, can be a good thing and a bad thing. But it has given modern millennial caregiving an edge, because millennial caregivers have taken advantage of technologies. We grew up in the information age. So as such, many of us certainly do our due diligence and our research, especially as it comes to health issues, Googling our symptoms and so on. For Generation Z, all of that was in place from the start. So it's quite a little bit, I would say, different. If you think about when the iPhone launched in 2007, the oldest Gen Zs were about 10. Now, by the time they were in their teens, the primary means by which young Americans were connecting was the web and through mobile devices. So communication changes things. Now, the implications of growing up in an always-on environment are only really now coming into focus. But certainly technology can give caregivers a leg up. It can also better help with communication, and we saw this during the pandemic. For example, use of video calls was very helpful. It's something we're still doing right now. Tablets and pads like Amazon's Echo have been designed specifically for seniors to make and receive calls. and for their children to be able to send photos that will automatically come up on the screen so you can always send something new. It's simplified. But at the same time, we need to be mindful of boundaries and how to disconnect. And I think that that's really important. Other countries have certainly considered this. For example, in France, you cannot send work emails during off hours, for example. It's actually illegal. So I think we need to sort of practice this a bit better because, as we were saying earlier, the always being on can be very challenging, especially when you need to switch gears and be a caregiver and not a full-time employee. So we have some very, very interesting resources to share at the end of our program that we put together just for millennials today. But I also want to share that AARP and Medicare.gov are excellent resources, but they wouldn't be obvious go-to places for millennials. That is changing, and AARP, because of rising inflation, is actually targeting millennials now because you can become a member of AARP at any age and take advantage of all of their discounts. So it's good to be a good consumer, but also a good consumer of information. Technology and online communities like 7 Cups is a great example of an online support community. If you're experiencing any mental health distress, please call 811, our new crisis intervention line. If you're looking for resources in your local communities, call 211. Always, we recommend our area agency on aging in every community as your one stop, your first stop that you should go to, and you can reach them through calling 211. And again, because these organizations don't target millennials, many millennials are not really aware that they exist and that they provide resources. So I'm going to jump ahead now. We put this great list together. We will be sharing a copy of our presentation with everyone today. And for those of you tech-savvy millennials who might be participating, things are hyperlinked as well, so that when you get the PDF copy, you can just click on it and it'll take you to the resource. And because some of these resources might not be familiar to our population of millennial caregivers, we also provided a little blurb here about each of them so that it could help you with what resources you might be looking for. All of that packed into just under an hour and leaving a few minutes, Glenda, for your announcements. And certainly, if anyone has any last questions or comments, we're happy to take them.
Absolutely. We can learn so much from you and encourage your participation in the conversation. I had to sit here and laugh at myself. Before we got started, I shared that I was born in 1946. And so at the end of this session today, I'm feeling really old. But what I'm trying to focus on is the similarities between the generations, and there are so many. And you know, we've suffered through 911 as you have, and it impacted us maybe in a different way, but we still all share that. So that's what I'm focusing on. Some affirmations for myself, Samara. Right. Well, let me tell you what's coming up on the Caregiver Teleconnection while you're thinking about what you might want to add. We have a lighter schedule in the fall and during the holidays, so we have 3 more sessions left this month. The next one is Tuesday, November the 8th, and it is a Spanish language session. And Minerva, if you could speak up and tell us what that is about. My Spanish is not that good.
Sure. The session's going to be how to prepare in the time of celebration and cold to be sane.
Okay. That's good. And that will be at 12 o'clock Central Time on Tuesday, November the 8th, which is tomorrow. And then next Monday on the 14th at also noon Central Time, we're talking about holidays. And so we have a session for you, Manage the Holiday Challenge of Family Caregivers with Sue Wallace. So tune in for that. And then our last session is going to be on Tuesday, November the 15th at 10 o'clock Central Time. One of our frequent presenters, Lucy Bearluck, and I know that y'all know Lucy. She's going to have a Dear Lucy session talking about dementia and inappropriate sexual behavior. So if you don't have the calendar, you can look that up on our Caregiver Teleconnection website. And I have posted our website there and also our customer service number if you need additional resources or help. Anyone have a question or a comment before we close today? Well, I want to thank Samara and Elliot for doing this wonderful presentation. And as I said, I'm so excited that it's going to be a podcast, and that's just a simple recording. It will be posted on our Caregiver Teleconnection website in the next couple of days. If you registered for today's call, you will get a copy of the presentation today. And as Elliot said, there are active links and some of the resource information. You'll be able to just click on those and go right to those sites. So Elliot, Samara, do you have some closing comments?
Just thanks so much, everyone, for participating. Stay safe, stay healthy, and happy holidays coming up.
I echo those same sentiments. Take care, everyone.
Absolutely. And Elliot, be careful down there with that upcoming hurricane, and we hope it is not that.
Well, you know that I know how to prepare.
I do know that. I do know that. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today, and we hope to see you soon on future Caregiver Teleconnection sessions. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.